Everyone, calm down. You have arrived in Velvet's reality. I am Velvet, and today we're going to take a look at Brass Tactics. Brass Tactics is a real-time strategy game and is $39.99 on the Oculus Store and can be played with other headsets using programs such as Revive. Today, we're going to take a look at some of my pros and my cons to Brass Tactics and see if you should be looking to buy it. So let's get started. Number 1. This may sound stupid, but it's a real-time strategy game in VR. One of the very few, and it is extremely well made. The abilities that you are able to do with the controls on your controllers is quite vast to the point that I don't really manage using all of them. Whether telling your units to patrol, or only gripping certain units, or selecting the same ones of the same type, or having them do an attack move, there's a lot you can do with the very few buttons that they have. The game is well programmed, well designed, well developed, and presents a lot of challenge managing the battlefield while in VR. With most strategy games from PC, you're able to zoom way out and you can see the entire battlefield and pretty quickly give out orders. With this, I have to actually move to the portion that I'm functioning with, meanwhile still watching the other side of the map and trying to give the orders I want in the way I want. One thing they did that I think was great is both hands have the exact same controls on them, so if you're really good at the game, you can actually control two different groups at the same time in every way, giving all of the commands and all of the orders through it. Number 2, the AI was extremely well made. There are 3 different personalities that you can play against. Each one plays extremely differently. They have very different palettes that they use. They have very different tactics that they use. And they don't make them really equal in that. As an example, I managed to beat Adaria and Garo on hard without too much difficulty. It was a battle, but it wasn't too bad. Zavalto beat me like I wasn't even ready to play the game. It felt like I was on tutorial and he was ready to go, and it really did not feel fair. Even on normal difficulty, Zavalto was a little bit harder than I feel like the other 2 were on hard. And it gives a nice dynamic with the AI. Between the 3 of them, you have Garo, who tends to be a little more sluggish and passive. His tactics are a little bit easier, and you can tell that by the writing that they gave into his dialogue. He sounds like he's not the most confident in the world. Then you have Adaria, who does a really good job working both sides of the map at the same time. She makes you have to function all across the board. But she isn't the most overwhelming by any means. She just does a good job managing things, and it makes it a challenge for you. And then you get to Zavalto, and it feels like he's doing everything you could possibly imagine to do at the same time, and somehow has more money than you. It makes it really hard. And it's a lot of fun to do. And it makes it to where going through the different maps that they have, just with the different tactics and the limited number of units, it does give the game a nice feel to it when you're playing by yourself. Number 3, the palette system and the units. Though they don't have a lot of selection, there's enough to keep it very interesting, especially since just because you picked the unit does not mean you're going to be upgrading them throughout the map and making them more viable. It makes the strategy and tactics to this game very intriguing. It makes it to where each game does not feel like a carbon copy of the last. You could play against the same AI on the same map and it will turn out completely differently simply by which upgrades you chose to do and which upgrades they went with. The game is very fast-paced, so there's not a lot of time to look to see what all's going on all the time. You need to pick quickly on what they're doing and what you need to do in response. Just as an example to that, on the basic units you have your warriors, your archers, and your cavalry, and they work in a rock, paper, scissors towards each other. The cavalry counter the archers the warriors, and the warriors counter the cavalry. And when the game starts off, whichever one you pick, they'll pick differently if they're starting a little slower than you, and vice versa. And just off of that, it changes the scope of the entire game. Now let's take a look at a few of the cons. Brass Tactics tends to function heavily off of momentum, which means once either player gets past the midway point on the map and gets a decent foothold, it unravels pretty quickly that direction. It's really hard to fight an uphill battle in Brass Tactics, which makes the games quicker. There's not going to be a lot of stalling out. You'll fight for a little bit of position and then it will get to the end relatively quickly. So though it is a con for me, it is not necessarily a bad feature. It does expedite the games. It simply makes it to where if you take a little too long, or especially if you're new to the game, it's hard to compete in some of these matches, especially if you want to play online. Number 2, Brass Tactics has a one-on-one mode. and it has a 2-on-1 against an NPC, and that's it. For whatever reason, and I refuse to be okay with it, Brass Tactics does not have a 2-on-2.
Yeah.
I've heard developers state that they are looking at it, but it's been several years, and there is still no multiplayer match, and I don't understand why. There is clearly no issues with the coding in regards to having a teammate because it has a 2-on-1 against the computer, but it does not have 2-on-2, which is mind-boggling to me. And I'm not saying they need to have it fully flushed out to where they're doing tournaments. None of that. Just have the option for me to play with a couple of my friends. That would so drastically increase the capabilities of this game. And given that they have the 3-person maps already against CPUs, it would make sense to just use those maps and let it be 2-on-2 and let it be what it is. It does not have to be this whole flushed out thing. Just put it in and let us test it. It's been way too long to be waiting for a feature that I feel like should have been added really early. All in all, I will have to say Brass Tactics is one of my favorite experiences in VR. It is a lot of fun to play with, but I play with a group of people, and it's really hard to stand there and wait 15 minutes for a match to finish for you to get your turn. And that's really what's kept me from really diving into Brass Tactics. I love this game. It is a lot of fun. The animations and the artwork for the towers and for your soldiers is extremely well done. The game is a lot of fun. The AI is enjoyable to play against because they trash talk in different ways. And then you add into it that if you lose your footing a little bit, you almost have a slight panic to try to get it back because of how much the momentum matters. And then if you're really trying to get good at the game, you're working 2 different sides of the map at the same time, working both hands. It's a lot of fun. There are a few small issues that, for me, I recently got the Valve Index and the controllers. It's a little tricky to get used to controlling without gripping down on the grips and moving around. But even with that, it's not been a problem. The big issues I feel like this game suffers from is the lack of multiplayer. I'd like to see them add a few more units. I'd like to see them add another personality or two to play against. But if they added multiplayer so that we can go 2-on-2 against each other, that would make this game so much better. And I really hope that that's something they do. That being said, I was happy to pay the $40 for it, and I do not regret it at all. I think this is a great game. And if you like strategy games, this is a great strategy game in VR. It is a lot of fun, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. Hopefully, this helps you guys make your decision going forward in regards to Brass Tactics. Thank you for listening. Brass Tactics is a real-time...
Like that now they have
I'm sorry.
In fact, it
Me
makes me
stupid.
so stupid.